chug, 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 chug,
Welcome back to the Wizard Staff. I'm your host, Guy.
And I'm Blake.
And we are two drunk novices who like to talk about EDH. We drink and swear, so you've been warned. It's been a while since we've recorded, since Blake's visit to San Francisco. And today we're bringing to you another one of our pet card series. But instead of finishing it off with the colors, we're going to kind of go into Colorless. Ooh.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick detour.
Right. I've only just been playing with my red deck recently. So that will definitely happen in the near future. But at the moment, we don't feel comfortable. And we wanted to do something a little easy since we haven't done something in quite a bit.
Yeah, I feel pretty worn out still from visiting you and all the stuff that we did together. And then I did a bunch of stuff after that too. So I kind of need an episode that's nice and simple.
Yeah, very chill. And though we do have Modern Horizons on the horizon, for the time that we're recording this, it's only coming out in 2 weeks, but by the time this is out, this Modern Horizon should be here. So we're also going to do a quick little, what are our top 3 most anticipated cards from there, because we don't want to do a full set review. Modern Horizons is specifically a modern set with some EDH friendly cards. So, yeah. First, before we get into it, what are we drinking tonight?
Oh, yes, of course. Tonight I am drinking White Claw hard seltzer water.
Yes, and so
raspberry.
I suggested that originally to Blake, and he went and bought an 18 pack. But when I went to Safeway, I was like, I'm not buying an 18 pack of this. That's ridiculous. I'm not going to drink all of this. And so I text him, and he's like, hey, I got the White Claw. And I was like, hey, I didn't want to buy an 18 pack. So Blake has a ton. And since we're not together, I can't help him finish it off.
I bought it, and then literally 10 minutes later, you told me, I'm not buying an 18 pack. And I'm like, okay, you fucker. I will.
Yeah, I thought I could get a 4-pack, so that's why I was optimistic about trying to buy it. So instead, I just bought some of my really cheap seltzer water that I like to drink, and then I bought a shot of vodka and just spiked it.
That works too. So we chose drinks that are on theme, on Colorless.
Yes, we try and be cute like that. Okay, Blake, do you want to do your first card for Modern Horizons?
Yep, we're just going to dive right into this. My top 3, my number 3 is Force of Negation. It is 1 blue instant. If it's not your turn, you may exile a blue card from your hand rather than play this spell's mana cost. Counter target non-creature spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So it's basically like the son of Force of Will, where instead you can cast for free by getting rid of another blue card in your hand, and it's basically another one of that, and it's just it's really good. And it's also just interesting because it's part of a cycle where you get a really good benefit of casting it for free if it's not your turn. If it is your turn, it gets much worse. So it's definitely more of a card that you want to play to prevent your opponents from winning the game versus, say, using it as a protection piece for you trying to go off and win. So that's a very interesting change in the rules text, and I really like that.
Yeah, I was trying to read this card because I realized the card itself does not get exiled. Force of Negation does not get exiled, so I was going to say that you could even flash it back, but you can't flash it back with something like Snapcaster Mage, because Snapcaster Mage requires you to pay the mana cost.
Yeah, so if you tried to Snapcaster it, it would cost, you'd have to pay for Snapcaster, and then you'd have to pay the 1 blue.
Right.
Oh well.
All right. So my third most anticipated card was the first card that they released for Modern Horizons during their previews. It's Sarah the Benevolent, who is a legendary planeswalker. Sarah. She costs 2 white. +2. Creatures you control with flying get +2/+0 until end of turn. -3. Create a 4/4 angel token with flying and vigilance. -6. You get an emblem. As long as you control a creature, damage that would reduce your life to 0 instead reduces it to 1. As she comes into the battlefield.
And how much loyal?
Let me finish. She comes into the battlefield with 4 loyalty counters. I'm reading top down.
You're gonna forget.
Oh my god. So essentially, if you get the emblem, it becomes a worship. So not bad, but I definitely want her more for the flavor that she creates the angel tokens that are like the original Sarah's angels, because this is Sarah. Sarah's one of the original planeswalkers from the lore as well. So she was considered to be one of the more powerful ones alongside Urza, who also has a card in this set. But we're not talking about him because he's pretty basic. Super powerful,
Yeah.
like, but basic. Like, we don't need him.
We'll see him eventually. Yeah. So you just want to make some cute angels?
Angels, and then also give my angels like +2/+0. So the idea is that I would probably just use her more for the fact of creating angels and making my angels stronger. I'm not super into the idea of doing the emblem because I could just play worship.
But now it's like another copy of worship.
I guess.
Yeah. All right. So my number 2 is Collector Ophi. It is 1 and a green for a creature Ophi 2/2. It's a hate bear, guys. And it says activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. It's basically the creature version of Stony Silence and Null Rod and the recent Karn the Great Creator. In the sense that like it just turns off all of your opponent's mana rocks and equipment. And that's really strong, let me tell you, because I've been playing with Stony Silence for years, and let me tell you, it just asymmetrically fucks all of your opponents really hard. It's like, I would say like 60% of decks I go against, it just hard fucks them, because it gets rid of their ramp.
Yeah, it probably fucks up most competitive decks too, because they rely on all those mana rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Do you plan to run this in Sigarda?
No, because if it was another Stony Silence, if it was another enchantment, but it's okay. I'll definitely put it probably in like maybe like one of my other decks, like Tatiova or something, because that has a bunch of like green creature tutors, because of course it has green.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm. And it is important to note that it doesn't affect like artifacts that have like static abilities. So like I think Tatiova has a few artifacts, but they're all static abilities, so Collector Ophi wouldn't affect them, so it's fine.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't specify just your opponents, it's everyone.
Yeah. But all you do is build a deck in the right way where you're not affected by it, and it's great and wonderful, and I love it. And he's just like so big, and he has such a huge face, and he's pretty cute.
Reminds me of Gremlins.
Yeah, kinda.
All right. My number 2 is Echo of Eons. It's a 4 blue sorcery. Each player shuffles his hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards. And you can give it flashback for 2U, so you can cast it from the graveyard. So a lot of the comparison has obviously been that this is Time Twister, which is one of the original Power 9 cards. Definitely one of the weaker Power 9 cards in my opinion, but still a very powerful card because of what it does at such a low cost. So I like this because in my deck I tend to like try and put stuff in the graveyard that I can then just flash back most of the time. So getting this card into the graveyard, knowing that that's when it's going to be useful, will definitely like play advantage to me. Plus I run cards like Narset, where, you know, if I have Narset out on the field, I can flash this back. Then only my opponents can draw one card, and then I'm drawing a whole new hand, and my graveyard's reshuffled into my library. So this and Time Spiral being same cost, but you cast it, doesn't have flashback, but then you can untap up to 6 lands, which is another really powerful card.
And I think one important thing to note about this is that it does not exile itself. So you can totally storm off and cast a whole bunch of these kinds of effects and just continuously go through your deck over and over again. I know some decks are planning to do that.
Well, doesn't it exile itself after you use it for flashback?
That's if you use the flashback, yes.
Right. So
yeah,
you could use this card over and over again because it doesn't exile itself if you use it for its 4 blue, but the flashback costs much cheaper, but then it would exile itself.
All right. So my final card that I'm looking forward to is Unbound Flourishing. It is 2 and a green, an enchantment. Whenever you cast a permanent spell with a mana cost that contains X, double the value of X. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell or activate an ability, if that spell's mana cost or that ability's activation cost costs X, copy that spell or ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. So that was really wordy, but basically, if you have a spell like with an X in its casting cost or an activated ability, just copy that. Just get twice as much. This is definitely going to go in like that commander deck. What's it called? Rushine Meanderer. Just because you're going to be running all those Hydras, and they're going to basically be twice as big. But then outside of that, I think it's kind of interesting because as I went through the whole list of cards that care about X in their casting cost or whatever, and there actually aren't that many. Like, not as many as I think people might think. And so there's like Animist's Awakening, Court of Calling, and Genesis Wave, and Wargate, which all have green in them. So those are probably going to be seen with this card because they both share green. But then you get into like other things like Debt to the Debtless, Torment of Hailfire, Exsanguinate, like all those black spells that can just kill everyone. If you're doing black and green, this can double it and just really make sure that your like Golgari deck is gonna kill them for sure. Then there's like a couple of like huge like red burn spells like Earthquake or Fireball or Molten Disaster. So like maybe you're playing Gruul and you just really, really burn them down. And then there's a couple other things like Sphinx's Rev or Word of Invention. But other than that, it's like outside of like that commander, like you basically want to be running multiple X spells to make this card really worth it. You don't want to have this Unbound Flourishing plus only one other X spell in your deck. That's not worth it at all. What do you think?
In our meta, this is one of the perfect examples of why I think this card will be much more relevant in Modern, because you can run multiples of some of these X spells, unlike in EDH where you can only have one of them. Mm-hmm. So it's a cool card and I like the art, and it definitely can be very powerful if you happen to get it off with, like, let's say Finalia Devastation, which is the green X spell where it's like X green. You can find a creature for X mana cost, and then, you know, if you do get X to be 10 or more, you can have like 2 really powerful creatures just come into the battlefield. So like it, but not like my first choice.
All right, that's okay. Why don't you talk about yours?
So my first choice is Winds of Abandon. So it is a 1 white sorcery. Says exile target creature you don't control. For each creature exiled this way, its controller searches their library for a basic land card. Those players put those cards onto the battlefield, tapped, then shuffle their libraries. Then it has Overload for 4 white. And so for Overload, you change the instant of target to each. So it would then say exile each creature you don't control. Very powerful because this becomes a massive exile board wipe, which gets around Indestructible, Hexproof, and Shroud. So what if you have to give all your opponents like the lands that they get, but that leaves them wide open for other things, like you attacking.
Yeah, I guess
them is
that's
what I
the.
mean.
Yeah, I guess that's the only thing I have to really say about this card is that, oh man, if you're gonna give them all those lands, you got to make sure they're not gonna be able to have time to capitalize on that. You got to hopefully like almost maybe be using this as an aggressive card rather than a defensive card, and just like be like, all right, all of your creatures are exiled. Yeah, you get all of these lands, but I don't care because now I'm gonna swing in with my own huge board, and all those lands you got, it doesn't matter because I just kill you. Because otherwise, if you use this defensively, you're probably on the back pedal. All of your opponents are like churning through their deck, winning, and then you just gave them all these lands, and then they're like, oh sweet, okay, well I'll just play the rest of my hand and now I have a new board. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't something where it's like, if I'm playing this, I definitely have to see like the end game in the next turn or two. Like, this isn't something where I'm like just in the middle of the game like, haha, and then I give my opponents the chance to use all this land to then build up a giant board state.
Okay, it sounds like you agree with me, so we'll go with that.
Well, yeah, right. I do agree with you.
So that's all we're going to say about Modern Horizons. Maybe we'll talk about it in the future if we find the card becomes super relevant, but stay tuned for our Core Set 2020 set review, because that's where we'll actually be. That's going to be great. Because our first one went
That's
so
probably
well.
the episode I'll get super drunk on. So
now we're going to move on to like the actual episode. This is a Colorless Pet Cards, top 5. And this series, like, we want to like eventually finish one day, like you were saying, and we'll do red one day. This is not a top 10 list, people. We're not saying that these are like the top 5 best artifacts or anything. We're not saying that these are like underrated cards. We're just saying that these are what we really like and enjoy. Yeah, so we'll give like a brief introduction. Do you want to do that, Guy?
Sure. So Colorless has often been identified with artifacts. In this list, you'll also see that we've included some planeswalkers and lands, because lands are actually inherently colorless. For the mana that they tap, does not make them into their like basic color identity, which it can actually be, as you'll see. I'll bring up an example when we do our list. But so Colorless was introduced in the very first set, Soul Ring, Basalt Monolith, Mana Vault, and those cards were then able to tap for specifically colorless. At the time, colorless just meant colorless, but then there was the introduction of Diamond Mana. And Diamond Mana is specifically colorless mana, so there are a few Eldrazi that require you to cast them by using colorless mana. So colorless mana goes into colorless diamonds, whereas generic mana is just the number in the circle.
Yeah, so normally, now we're going to get into the cards. Normally we have this rule that like a card can't be more than $25.
Yeah, Blake? Yeah, Blake?
Yeah, so I made the entire list, and I'm like, okay, I'm done. And then Guy, you were like, but these are over $25. I'm like, oh shit, they are, aren't they? So this will probably be like the one episode we break our rule, because there weren't any other cards that I felt this strongly deserved a spot on my list. So we're gonna break our own rules. And some of these will be over $25. Yeah.
And it's also then worth noting that since some of these are over $25, that probably means that they're a lot more powerful. So definitely keep that in mind as you're listening to this. And also then keep in mind that since they are colorless, you can be running them in any of your decks. So for the one where we do break the rule, we're trying to like help out all the colors here.
All right. So I'm going to do like quick lightning round examples of some colorless cards. We have Ashnod's Altar, All is Dust, Akroma's Memorial, Solemn Simulacrum, Cage Sun, Chromatic Lantern, Emrakul the Promised End, Font of Mythos, Howling Mind, Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, Winter Orb, Static Orb, Nevinyrral's Disc, Rings of Brighthearth, Sensei's Divining Top, Skull Clamp, and the entire sort of blank and blank cycle. Those are just ones that a lot of players know, and I wanted to mention them really fast. Some colorless cards that often are like can win games. Well, there's Paradox Engine. I think it's pretty notorious. Everyone knows that one. Let's do untapping and tapping shenanigans until you win. And then there's also our boy Blightsteel Colossus. Okay, if any of you have been listening to this podcast long enough, like, you should have just been expecting this card from the very beginning of this episode. And if you didn't, you're a damn fool. He's just so great.
Yeah.
He's so big and he's so strong, and he'll just kill you with one swipe.
He's also gone
He's great, man.
way above the price limit recently.
Yeah.
Even though some of our cards,
Alright.
like we've mentioned on this list, are above that price limit. But Blightsteel Colossus had a recent spike when the new Tezzeret came out.
Yeah. It's great. Alright, so we're just gonna finally dive right in now. So my number 5 is Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. It costs 10 colorless. It is a legendary creature Eldrazi. It's a 10/10 that when you cast it, exile 2 target permanents. It has Indestructible. And whenever it attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of their library. So the reason this is on my list is this is the very first Magic card that I ever received in the mail. And so I open this like envelope, I look at this card in this hard case, and it's just like this big, ominous looking creature. And even just by the numbers, I don't know anything. Like, I know almost nothing about Magic, but I just see all the big numbers and see like Indestructible, and like I already knew like how good exiling was, and just getting rid of 20 cards from a library seemed insane to me. And so I was like, this is so badass.
I remember getting the snap that you were building a Magic deck, and I remember getting this snap of Ulamog in my Snapchat. Jesus, I just said Snapchat like 3 times. But yeah, I just looked at it and I was like, what the hell is this? Like, Blake's playing Magic now? What a fucking nerd.
And then I dragged you into the hell with me. Yeah, so like when I opened this, I was just like, man, this is Indestructible, and it exiles 2 permanents, like any permanent. Like, this is so good. How can I possibly lose? Like, there's no way I'm gonna lose now. And then I figured out better.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those mistakes that you make as a beginning player.
Yeah, but I will say, like, when I swung at people with this card, and then you just see the dread on their face as their hand goes towards the top of their library, and one by one they flip over cards, and you can see the dread and sorrow on their faces as they're watching all of their precious cards. It's like, that's gone forever. That's gone forever. You're never getting that back. And then by the end of it, the mean part of me is like, yes. But then immediately they're like, you just got rid of all the cards that I love. I'm gonna kill you now. And I'm just like, damn it. Was it worth it? I don't know. I don't know if it was. People like their cards. People don't like seeing their cards being exiled. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
All right. My number 5 is Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. It is a legendary land, and it says each land is a swamp in addition to its other types. This was actually one of the first expensive cards I bought. Around the time when I bought it, it was at 30, but due to its recent reprint in Ultimate Masters, it's now at, I think, 14, 15 when I checked yesterday. It definitely has the obvious Cabal Coffers Urborg combo where you're able to then, turn all your lands into swamps, and then Cabal Coffers will give you mana according to how many swamps you control. So pretty powerful, and definitely like a good mana fixer if you're also just looking for black mana. But also, I recently learned that you could run this card in a mono white deck and give, or just like you could put this card in any colored deck, even though that it makes cards swamps, because then you can give creatures swamp walk. Since now all your opponent's lands are also swamps, you're able to like go in and swing and be unblockable, which is pretty powerful. And definitely something that not a lot of people see coming. It's kind of like a degenerate thing to do, but very powerful.
I think it's cute. I don't know. I like it.
Definitely something that people don't see coming. I think Charlotte from the CAG brought it up when she was a guest on the Commander's Brew.
Commander Theory podcast interview.
Yeah. So just speaking to that is kind of like, how powerful is this card?
Yeah. Lands are colorless, and that is a very weird thing to think of, but it's true. All right. I'm going to do my number 4. It is Ugin the Spirit Dragon. It costs 8 colorless, is a legendary planeswalker, comes in with 7 loyalty. You can +2 him to deal 3 damage to any target, or -X, exile each permanent with converted mana cost X or less, that's 1 or more colors. Or -10, you gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, then put up to 7 permanents cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So this card right here, like, first off, like, can I just say, this is one of the few cards in Magic where every single art I see of this card I absolutely adore. Like, every single art is so good looking. And I didn't realize until recently that Ugin is a dragon, but all of his wings, his wings, instead of being a dragon and being webbed, they have feathers. And it's just like, you never see a dragon. I don't think in any like fantasy like imagery or whatever I've ever seen a dragon with feathers. And it's like, well, I think it's supposed to symbolize like, oh, he's more angelic, angel feathers. He's good, and Nicol Bolas is bad. But yeah, it's still really interesting to me, character design wise at least. Yeah. So my friend Park, who's been on our Stacks episode, he runs a Kozilek Butcher of Truth commander deck, and he has this in it, and he'll just be tutoring for something, and he's like, man, how do I deal with your board? And I'll just roll my eyes, and I'll just be like, Ugin. And he's like, thanks, man. Ugin, wipe your board. And I'm just like, yep. Because, oh god, that's so good, because like, you just exile like almost every non-land permanent basically that your opponents have. And it's so devastating, and it's not even like they can get it back from the graveyard. It's exiled, and it's just one of the best like board wipes possible. Like, you have to be in a colorless deck to do it, like for its most potential, so that your board doesn't get wiped. But it's just like, oh my god, it's so good. And yeah, but yeah, that was a like example, but I'm definitely that kind of player where I will tell you like how to like kill me or other people. I'll be like, oh yeah, you can do this to me, or oh, like I have this problematic card and you're trying to figure out what to do. Oh, you can just use this card or that card and get rid of it. I'm like, I have a very weird way of doing politics.
I don't think I've seen a time when this card hasn't been. It's definitely one of the most powerful planeswalkers in like EDH relevance, I would say. The -X, it's crazy. If you do get them to do -10, but I feel like most people just run them to play -X.
Yep, that's what you do. It's pretty great. I love exiling so much. It's so great.
All right. My number 4, and probably the most expensive card on this list, because once Blake broke his rule, I was like, all right, well then I'm going to include a very expensive card of my own.
You just had to one-up me.
I just had to. But so my number 4 is Grim Monolith, and it's a 2-mana artifact, and you can tap it for 3, but it does not untap during your untap step. In order to untap it, it costs 4. Definitely a card that most competitive EDH decks run, just because of the ability to ramp as hard as it does. It's very searchable with cards like Fabricate, the new tribute mage that's coming out in Modern Horizons is going to be able to find this bad boy in a second. It's one of the cards I normally go to when I'm playing my Jace deck, and I can normally get it into my hand like turn 3 or 4. So the idea is that you tap it, you enchant it with Power Artifact, so that when you can untap it, it only costs 2 to untap, so you're always going to net 1. So you tap for 3, untap for 2, and you can do that infinite, quote-unquote, as many times as you want. Pretty great. I'll then use it with another card like Fascination, which was my number 1 blue card, and there's another card that I'll mention after Blake goes that also works really well with this card. The downside to this, because it definitely pays homage to Basalt Monolith, is that it does not work with Rings of Brighthearth, which is a artifact that when combined with Rings of Brighthearth can do something similar and create infinite mana. But because of the math that Grim Monolith has, you unfortunately would just like break even every time that you would tap and untap it.
I run all those cards too, and it's, man, making infinite colorless mana, it's pretty nice. It's pretty, and for so cheap, it's pretty nice. Yeah.
Well, not
so
cheap
my number
in the
3,
fact that money, but it's cheap in the fact that it
not
because
mana cost.
I think this card is now sitting around $150.
Yeah, I like how it's like the lower the CMC is of certain cards, like the more expensive they are. It's
Always.
It's that kind of it's one of those relationships. So my number 3 is Void Winnower. Yeah, baby. We're talking 9 for a creature Eldrazi. That's an 11/9, and your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana cost. And your opponents can't block with creatures with even converted mana costs. But that first part is what we really, really care about. It just says, okay, so that means your opponents can't cast stuff that's 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc., etc. Basically, all of your opponent's spell, like half of them, are useless. They can't cast them.
I think it's also really important to mention that if you cast a card like, let's say, Finale of Devastation, that has an even converted mana cost. Even though that it has X, and you could cast it for potentially like an odd number, because the card has an even converted mana cost, you can't cast it.
Are you tired of an overloaded Cyclonic Rift?
Shut the fuck up.
Well, they can't. Because it's 2 CMC, technically.
Right.
Yeah. This does cost like 9 mana, so I don't really consider it a stacks piece, because most stacks pieces like are really small incremental and they cost maybe 1, 2, 3 mana. But it definitely is like what I consider like a lockout card. It's like with this, your opponents can't cast half their spells. It kind of is on the same vein as Iona Shield of Emeria, which you just name a color and your opponents can't cast spells of that color. It can fully lock out, like that one can fully lock out a certain deck if they're monocolored, but like if you're playing like a deck that has multiple colors, it only partially locks you out, and you're just like, can I use my other colors or my odd converted spells to kill this? Because I've seen a lot of people, okay, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, so be prepared. I've seen a lot of people talk about Void Winnower and how it's like too strong and there's no answers for it. All right, so bullshit. Like, I'm about to go off on a like lightning round of single target removal that deals with Void Winnower. Here we go. Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Oblivion Ring, Banishing Light, Grasp of Fate, Oblation, Pongify, Rapid Hybridization, Imprisoned in the Moon, Murder, Hero's Downfall, Ashes to Ashes, Ruinous Path, Chaos Warp, Star of Extinction, Song of the Dryads, Beast Within, Scour from Existence, Spine of Ishsaw, Karn Liberated, Anguish Unmaking, Vindicate, Mortify, Detention Sphere, Windgrace's Judgment. Okay, so like I realize not every color can deal with certain permanents, like a creature spell, but between you and like theoretically your two other people that don't have that Void Winnower, between the three of you, you should at least be able to say, hey, in my deck, I have 1 or 2 answers for this. If oh my god, if someone plays a Void Winnower and I say like, hey, I have 2 or 3 answers in my deck, what about you guys? And they both say like 0, I'm just gonna be like, are you kidding me? Like, you guys need to build better decks. I'm sorry. Like when I'm building a deck, literally one of the last questions I ask myself is, like, can it deal with certain really powerful cards? Like, can it deal with an Iona Shield of Emeria? Can it deal with a Void Winnower? Because otherwise, like, your deck just can't function. And so, please, for the love of God. And, like, I'm about to list even more. So there's, like, board wipes here, too. You got Toxic Deluge, Blasphemous Act, Oblivion Stone, Hallowed Burial, Citywide Bust, Cleansing Nova, Planing Outburst, Rout, Slaughter of the Strong, Tragic Arrogance, Fell the Mighty, Fumigate, Crux of Fate, Demonic Selection, Ingarrick's Wake, Pernicious Deed, Time Wipe. I made all of these lists in 6 minutes. Like, come on, guys. Like, please, for the love of God, put answers to Void Winnower in your deck.
I think it's easier for people to like look at the card and be like, ugh, I'm really annoyed. And I know that I've played against the card and like that's how I feel. But then when I saw your lists, I definitely was like, oh, okay. That's not as bad as I thought. There's definitely a lot of cards that I could, use. And actually I do have, a lot of these cards just because of like how common and powerful they are. I just gotta think for a moment instead of like bitch about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you might not want to give away right away that, you have this card that can get rid of Void Winnower in fear of, like, the owner of the Void Winnower, like, saying something or being able to prepare. But, definitely just table talk.
Oh, well, no. Like, the person who plays Void Winnower, they already know that they have become arch enemy. They know it's now 3v1. Like, they know what they're doing when they play that card. I have that card. Like, I know what you get in with. Yeah, just please run answers, people. All right, why don't you talk about your card, guy?
Now that Blake's done bitching. All right, my number 3 is Walking Ballista. It is an XX cost. It's an artifact creature construct. It enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. For 4 generic mana, you can put a +1/+1 counter on Walking Ballista. You can then remove a +1/+1 counter from Walking Ballista, and it can deal damage to any target. So, going off of my last card, like I just mentioned, Grim Monolith, and being able to create infinite mana with that, this is then one of those other combo finish-off pieces. Because you are able to create infinite mana, you declare that you create, 400 generic mana, or colorless mana in that case. And so, because Walking Ballista is XX, the 400 then becomes 200 counters onto Walking Ballista because you have to split it in half. And then you can just remove them at instant speed and do 200 damage to all your opponents, and that's almost always going to be able to kill them. But I mean, if you know that you need more than 200 for some reason, then just declare that you do it for like 1,000, like 1,000,000, like whatever. It's one of those.
Whatever's needed.
Yeah, whatever's needed. 400 is just an easy example.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it suck if someone played a Void Winnower and you couldn't cast your Walking Ballista or a Grim Monolith?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I hate that card. Because I think in that my blue deck, that's something I need to be a little more cautious of. Is like, okay, how do I get rid of Void Winnower in that deck, or how do I get rid of Iona Shield of Emeria? Iona would probably be the harder threat. But
Pongify and Rapid Hybridization.
Well, with Iona, what if Iona says blue?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, that's true.
Yeah.
Hope they don't politic your way until they don't name blue.
Okay. Well, the way that I play with my blue deck, they're probably playing Iona to get rid of the blue. All right, so
Probably.
you would you would just have to counter Iona before that. That's the only answer. All right, but the other nice thing about Walking Ballista is because it's technically a zero-cost artifact, it becomes much more searchable with some cards. Tolaria West and Trinket Mage, best two examples because you can transmute Tolaria West to find a zero-cost artifact. So 3 mana, find it. Or Trinket Mage, which is also 3 mana. So, pretty good. All right. Want to go to number 2?
Yep, my number 2 is Witchbane Orb. It is 4 CMC artifact that says when it enters the battlefield, destroy all curses attached to you, and you have hexproof. So a little story time. The very first deck I built was Una, Queen of the Fae, and it was very casual. It was mill and exile. And then my friend Bodhi, he no longer plays anymore, but when he did, it was great. He played a Marin deck, and that deck really cares about, setting up the graveyard and reoccurring your creatures. But my deck just naturally screwed with that, where I would just constantly be feeding his graveyard and then exiling it. And he would just sometimes I'd be able to politic with him where I'd be like, hey, I'll fill up your grave and we can be friends, right? And then he'll be like, yeah. And then he'll start winning and I'll be like, okay, no, I exile your graveyard. And he's like, but we were going to be friends. Anyway, so he got tired of me targeting him with Una. And so he's like, fuck this. I'm putting in Witchbane Orb so you can't target me anymore. And that was the very first example of, I think, someone in my meta specifically doing a meta card. And I don't know, it was a very big, important learning moment for me where I was like, oh, you're adapting to my deck? Okay. This definitely isn't good in all situations, but against me, this is really good. And it made me it was the first example of a meta card, and it taught me a lot, and I think I'm a much better player for it. Because now I know how to deal with that crappy card.
Yeah, it's nice that you were able to identify that and at such an early phase, too, as a player. Whereas I feel like, I didn't really think about, oh, what's my meta like, just because I had very little interaction like that now. But if I do build future decks and I'm playing with people at the time, I have to think oh, how am I going to deal with so-and-so?
Yeah.
All right. My number 2 is Grafted Exoskeleton. It's 4 mana, artifact. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has Infect. Ooh.
Ooh, spooky.
When Grafted Exoskeleton becomes unattached from a permanent, sacrifice that permanent, and then you can equip it for 2. So since it's colorless, you can run it in any deck, like we've mentioned. I run it in Jolta specifically because when Jolta comes out, I can just make him a 14/14 Infect Trample creature, so he becomes a huge threat. And the first time I played with Jolta, that's actually how I won. I was able to use Cream of the Crop, which was another card I've mentioned before. Get Grafted Exoskeleton, put out Jolta, and my opponent, he was the last one. He had used all of his creatures. I had fogged the board, so he was wide open. Just go in with a Trample Jolta. I think I might want to also run this in Avacyn, just because, making Avacyn an Infect Angel seems really cool, but I don't know if this would be my priority.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because I actually kind of think about Grafted Exoskeleton being better than World Slayer in a mono white deck, just because World Slayer, while good and can destroy everything, it's 10 mana in a mono white deck that makes it kind of hard to cast.
Yeah, I still want you to try to get that to happen one day. I'm rooting for you really bad.
Yeah, maybe one day. I'm not gonna like throw it out just yet, but like every time I like see the card, I'm like, I have not used you, and I know that you can be a superstar, but like you just haven't come through for me yet. So that's why it's not even on my list. Like if it felt so, it could have been the best thing since sex, but I just haven't seen it yet.
Okay. Oh, good one. All right. So we have made it to our number 1 colorless pet cards. I'm really excited about this.
Ta-da.
All right, here we go. My number 1 is Razor Boomerang. All right, stay with me.
Who?
Stay with me. Okay, stay with me here. Hear me out. Hear me out.
Who?
It is a 3. It is 3 colors to cast. It's an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has tap, unattach Razor Boomerang. It deals 1 damage to any target. Return Razor Boomerang to its owner's hand, and it has an equip cost of 2. So, this is considered one of the worst, like, if not equipment cards of the entire game. It's just one of like the worst cards ever. And the story behind this and why I like it is because I was hanging out with Park one day at his place, and we're looking at Magic the Gathering cards on Gatherer, you know, typical. And we're just going through every single, like, we're trying to find out a way in which his colorless deck can deal like direct damage and how to do that the most efficiently. And then we come to a realization that he can animate lands like Blinkmoth Nexus, Inkmoth Nexus, Mutavault, or Mishra's Workshop. Lands that you can pay 1 mana and they become a creature. And then you have Paradox Engine out and some rocks that tap for mana. And you then cast Razor Boomerang, attach it or equip it to one of the animated lands, and then because they probably have been out for a turn, they don't have summoning sickness, you can immediately tap it. And then it deals 1 damage to an opponent, it returns to your hand, and then you can recast it, trigger Paradox Engine, untapping your land and your mana rocks, and you loop that over and over and over again. Every time it actually bouncing back to your hand is a good thing, because then you can reset your rocks using Paradox Engine and keep the loop going. And what ends up happening is you get into an infinite loop where you boomerang all your opponent's death 1 damage at a time to their face, and that's how you win. And it is the stupidest thing in the world, and I love it. We literally sat there for like 30 minutes just making sure that we were reading the card right and that we weren't like messing up and that it worked the way that it does. And it's so stupid, but it works, and I love it, and I don't think anybody else knows about this. I'm fairly confident in saying that.
So wait, how does it untap like Blinkmoth Nexus or Inkmoth Nexus?
Hold on. I might need to call Park and just be like, hey, does this work the way we're thinking? So, after calling Park, he needs to look into that wording, but he says that he doesn't actually use the lands that often. He can still often attach Razor Boomerang to an Eldrazi or just any creature that doesn't have summoning sickness. And there's a lot of times he says that he casts a creature that turn and gives them like Swiftfoot Boots so it has haste, and attach it and do the loop that way. He doesn't even use the lands. I was wrong. Most of the time he says he doesn't even use those lands. And he's like, oh.
Okay. In that scenario, yeah, it works. But yeah, when you use that example, I was like, so wait, why is he having to use Blinkmoth Nexus or one of these lands in specific because then also Paradox Engine isn't going to be able to untap them, so then they can tap with the Razor Boomerang.
Yeah, I don't actually think it works with those lands, and so now he knows. But he says, I asked him, and he says he's not going to take it out. That it's still, most of the time, again, he uses creatures.
Right. In that case, yes, it's fine. But because
it still works. It still works.
All right. So now that we
fun.
had to call apart for like, I don't know, 10 minutes, we're gonna get into my final card. Platinum Angel. 7 generic mana, artifact creature Angel. You can't lose the game, and your opponents can't win the game. So the Masterpiece Edition is the one that I am specifically in love with, though I've gotten a lot of like talk from people that they're like, it doesn't look that cool, but shut up, you're wrong. It came up in our first video as well when we were talking about our favorite decks. Blake also brought up Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. So we've kind of come a little full circle here. I looked up some of the lore to this card, and so I'm going to read you what I know from quotes. Aloof and mysterious, angels were rarely seen on Mirrodin. Like all life on the plane, its angels had metallic parts, particularly like wings. Revered by the Eric, these angels were primarily aligned with the Bringer. In the war against the growing influence of Phyrexia, numerous angels fought and died to halt the corruption. Several of those were captured and forcibly completed. While multiple of these corrupted angels served the machine orthodoxy, Elish Norn has one occasion cooperated with the other Praetors to create a particular powerful servant of New Phyrexia. Pretty cool. Really like it, especially in Avacyn, because when you have them out, it's pretty much you can't lose or win the game until you exile Platinum Angel. Platinum Angel then becomes the, not bigger threat, but like, you know, it becomes a hurdle before you could then win the game. I do know in the rulings that this trumps all other win conditions. So if you have Lab Maniac out, and let's say you draw your whole library, if I have Platinum Angel out, you actually lose. Because you can't use the effect of Lab Maniac to win the game, because Platinum Angel is out. So can't abilities, and this is the case for like any other scenario like this where can't on the field trumps can.
I'm glad you made that distinction, because I will play games, someone will play a Platinum Angel, and my fellow players will be like, all right, he can't lose the game, whatever. And then I'm like, no, not whatever. It says that you can't win the game, because they'll just go on and like leave it for a couple turns and try to just win, like generate value and win. And they forget they can't win because Platinum Angel, like, people need to realize, guys, it's one of those cards that like it turns into arch enemy, and as long as that card is on the field, because people forget they can't win. Why are you bothering doing anything besides getting rid of this card? You have no chance of winning, literally.
I think the best way to teach someone is just, if they say like, whatever, he can't lose, okay, do whatever you want, waste all your resources. Then when you quote unquote win, I'll just point to this card and say, you can't win.
Yeah, because I feel like if someone's bothering to run Platinum Angel in their deck, they have ways of like really making sure it stays on the board, like your Avacyn deck, by making it indestructible. And I imagine you have some boots or whatever that give it Shroud or Hexproof too. And at that point, your opponents are like, well, fuck. We need to all work together now to get rid of it. And I'm like, well, you should have done that before he cast Avacyn and gave it all the boots now, huh? Now we have to spend like 3 times as many resources. Fuck.
Right.
Salty.
So
learn threat assessment.
I know the only other way to hose this card is with Divine Intervention, which is a enchantment that comes into the battlefield with 2 counters, and you remove a counter each upkeep, and then once you remove all the counters, the game technically becomes a draw. So it gets around the fact that you didn't lose the game and your opponents didn't win the game, so the game's over, and then you just play again. But that's not why you're playing EDH. You're playing to win.
Yeah, usually. I've seen it once.
All right. So that wraps up all of our colorless cards. We hope you heard some, pretty powerful cards on this list. Cards that you can now run in any of your deck. You have any final words, Blake?
They're great. I love them.
Yep. Love them. All right. Thank you very much for listening. We are on iTunes, Spotify. You can listen to us on YouTube. We're on Twitter, WizardStaff101. And we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Peace.
Care をし合って革命のちぎり誰にも